If I ask most of you what you thought of when I played that snare drum, I don't think any of you would say the word serendipity. However, I can't help but think of serendipity every time I play a snare drum or hear one. So what's serendipity? Serendipity is finding something of value when you're not looking for it, a happy accident. Throughout history, music has been used for communication. And as with any art form, the history of the snare drum is riddled with serendipitous events that have changed how we use it and how we use it to communicate. Snare drums were initially military signaling devices, and they were perfected around the 1500s by Swiss mercenary armies. Usually an 11 or 12-year-old boy would wear this in battle, around their neck on the side of their body. Sometimes snare drums are referred to as side drums because of the side of their body. Instead of holding the sticks this way, which would be very uncomfortable for long marches, they would hold them upside down, one stick, which we actually call traditional grip. The defining element of this instrument, though, are the snares themselves. Cables that run across the bottom head, snug tightly to this head to create a brand new sound. Snares were originally not even remotely connected to music. No, they were animal traps, because people would ensnare their dinner with these cables. And one of the most interesting facts is, what were the cables made of? They were usually made out of dried out cat intestines, or gut snares, as we call them today. Well, these gut snares changed the way we use this instrument. So let me demonstrate. Here's a snare drum with no snares on. I'm going to play a beat from the Revolutionary War called the preparative. This would have meant get your musket ready to any soldiers on the battlefield. So no snares. Now with the snares. The difference is powerful and immediate. Battlefield communication would never be the same again. Commanders could instruct their soldiers from afar. A serendipitous marriage, if you will, of an animal trap and a musical instrument. Well, serendipitous for all involved except the cats, I guess. But rest assured, we don't use cat parts anymore making snare drums. These are modern snares. We make them of metal, and if we need that gut snare drum sound, we can actually coat these in plastic to get the desired timbre. So these instruments reigned supreme on battlefields for over 500 years. And around the early 1900s, their popularity started to wane in the military. Why? Because battles became much louder and much more spread out. A soldier in a tank or a pilot in an airplane would never be able to react to that. So snare drums were almost destined to go into the history books, such as the horse-drawn carriage. However, serendipity stepped in again, another happy accident. There was another revolution brewing, and this time it was in New Orleans. And the revolution was a brand new hot dance music sweeping all of the restaurants and clubs in New Orleans, and it would eventually be known as jazz. And snare drums are perfectly suited to accompany dance music. So as the music came inside, and this is before microphones or amplifiers, this became way too loud. Well, to keep their jobs, the drummers had to figure out a way to keep that energy level up and the volume down. So, another happy accident. Since most of the establishments that these musicians were playing in were restaurants and bars, and there was no air conditioning, so the windows would have been open in New Orleans, there were an abundance of Flyswatters available. Flyswatters before World War I looked exactly like this. Today we call these jazz brushes, but they're actually Flyswatters, the design. Listen to the change. All of a sudden, the volume was cut in half, and they could play these beats. But the other thing that the brushes did was expanded the vocabulary of drummers, because now they weren't relegated to just playing marches and military music. Now they started playing songs of love and lament and longing from the Great American Songbook. Well, love songs, of course, remained popular throughout the 20th century, and the beat changed from jazz to rock and roll. No group better exemplified that than the Beatles. February 9th, 1964, the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, and their drummer, the great Ringo Starr, changed drum history by accident that night on television. If you remember, I said schooled and military drummers played this way. Ringo didn't play that way. He was a self-taught drummer, and he's actually left-handed. So this would have been very unnatural and uncomfortable for a left-handed self-taught drummer. What did Ringo do? he held both sticks the same way, called matched grip. After that television appearance, hundreds of thousands of young people flocked to the stores and bought drumsticks and drum sets and started to play. And who did they want to play like? Their hero, Ringo. 72 million people watched that one television appearance in February of 1964. Well, teachers and students alike started to accept the matched grip as a standard way to play. I was one of those students. About 20 years after the Beatles appeared on Ed Sullivan, I was a budding piano player. I was in 8th grade, just finishing middle school, and my parents wanted me to continue my musical studies through high school. They wanted me to be involved in some sort of activity. So they encouraged me to go to the local high school marching band meeting. And when I say encouraged, it was more like, get in the car, you're going to the meeting, we don't care. So I got in the car, they took me to the meeting, all right? The director found out I played piano, so he put me in the percussion section. And where were they? They were going to meet in the parking lot, of course. So we all assembled in the parking lot, all of us fledgling percussionists just waiting for something, and the older kids came out into the parking lot with their instruments. It was about 8 to 10 kids. They had a few snares, some bass drums, and some other things. And they proceeded to play an exercise like this. That was the first time I had ever seen or heard drums played live, and I was 5 feet in front of the drum line. I physically was moved and emotionally moved by what I had seen. The magic that these kids' hands were performing, I didn't understand it, and I wanted to be part of it. That parking lot changed my life. A meeting that I didn't want to go to turned into a lifelong obsession with drums. I started following my passion after that, and that's all I wanted to do was play drums. And it's been a wonderful journey. It brought me here today. It's taken me to the country's best stages. I've been able to play with some of the biggest acts in the music industry. I was even commissioned to write a full orchestra piece featuring percussion that debuted at Carnegie Hall in New York City. Another great thing is that I've been able to become friends and collaborate with some of my musical heroes. One of special note is the great Liberty DeVito, rock drum legend. He ignited the Billy Joel Band for 30 years in live performances and in recordings. I've had the privilege of being Liberty's friend for about 20 years now. 10 years ago, he called me because he was going to be performing near my hometown of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, here on the East Coast of the United States. He was going to be doing a guest lecture at a kids' rock and roll camp, teaching the kids how to rock and roll and telling stories from the road. So he called me and said, hey, why don't you come down, check this thing out, and we'll grab some food afterwards. So, of course, I didn't miss the chance. I went down to that elementary school, I saw the end of his session, and then I met him in the hallway. And I think we were just trying to figure out where we were going to eat, to be honest with you. But as we were in the hallway, all these little kids were running by us, going to their next session. And they all had binders. And on the front of every binder, it said, learn to play rock and roll guitar. Learn to play rock and roll drums. Liberty thought this was humorous, so he said, let me see one of those things. I need to learn something. So he started looking through it and joking with the kids. He gave me one of the binders. It was the drum set binder. And he said, what do you think of this? And I looked at it, and I gave my honest opinion. I said, Liberty, I think this book stinks. And he goes, well, can you write a better one? And I went home that night, and I drafted the first 10 pages of a drum set book, the way I thought one should be written. I sent it to him before I went to bed that night. He added a few things, and over the next few days, he sent that book to some of his contacts in the music business. Within less than a year, we were in Manhattan in a boardroom signing a contract for our first drum set book. And then it led to a second drum set book. And since that serendipitous meeting in the hallway with my friend while we were planning lunch, I've been able to write 5 books on drums, percussion, and jazz. I asked Liberty, because I told him my parking lot story with the drum line. I said, hey man, I was 13 when I first really got interested in drums. How old were you? He said, I was 13 too. I said, tell me the story behind what got you involved. He said, well, I was 13 and I was at my parents' house and we were watching TV. It was February 9th, 1964, and the Beatles were on TV. And I saw Ringo, and that's what I wanted to do. And that brings us full circle. All of these happy accidents brought Liberty and I together, all the way from the ridiculous addition of putting cat guts on a snare drum to using Flyswatters to enhance the sound of music. So my challenge to you is this. Try to identify serendipity in your life, these happy accidents. It might not be music, whatever your field happens to be. Because even the most mundane thing, as meeting your friend in the hallway for lunch, could change your life. And it could make the soundtrack of your life bolder, richer, and resonate further than you ever thought possible. Thank you.